Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is another edition of Let's Talk Broncos, and this one's a little special. This one's a little special. We're in the college football draft season right now, and I think I'm sitting beside one of the best in the business, and that's Devin Jackson. He is with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I've been following this guy for a really long time, and just someone who indulges myself into the content, the NFL draft content. I think Devin's one of the best. So, Devin, how are you doing today, man? Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I appreciate the high praise, man. I love talking ball. I love the NFL draft. I think it's such a interesting time of year. You get so many different opinions, but I try for the most part just to deliver some unbiased opinions, unbiased takes on players. So I just try to strive for that and give people as much information as possible. But yeah, I'm doing great today, man. We're right in the thick of NFL draft season, a couple of weeks out from the combine. So it's really that in between time where NFL season's officially done, and everyone's getting into the draft, and obviously you see a lot of differing takes from people that mostly focus on NFL teams and NFL the NFL season. But I think it's the most exciting time of the year. Different information from a lot of different people, but it all really unfolds at the NFL Combine and going forward from there.
Absolutely. I always say like this is the one time a year, Devin, where it feels like everybody thinks they have a shot at the Super Bowl. This is
Yeah.
that one time a year. Like we're one guy away. I swear, we're one guy away. Everybody's excited for the draft. It's not just one or a few teams that made it to the playoffs. Every single team's excited for the draft. And you're going to the combine, right?
Yep. I'll be in the combine in a couple weeks. I'm there from Tuesday to Sunday, so pretty much every day that prospects are available to talk and test outside of Sunday evening, I'll be there and on the ground there.
Cool. So make sure you guys are following all that content on Twitter. That's at real D_Jackson. And I'll make sure to put that in the comment section when this drops. So you guys can go make sure you're following all of that. But Devin, I wanted to talk to you about your mock draft that you put out. And I thought there was some interesting stuff in there. And I just wanted to pick your brain on it. First, Drake May, right? For me, one of my favorite players in this draft. I really am a huge Drake May fan. He goes to 6 to the New York Giants, while Jane Daniels goes second to the Commanders. I think that's kind of different than what the consensus usually would be. So I just kind of want to run down your brain. Why do you think this would be a possibility, or why would you do it this way?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about or trying to think about obviously the Cliff Kingsbury hire. I think in Washington makes things interesting, and not so in the fact that I don't think they'll. I mean, I feel like they want Caleb Williams, but ultimately I could see them in a scenario taking Drake May. But for me, it was more about testing the different scenarios and what could happen. And since I wasn't doing any draft picks just yet, I think May still goes inside the top 3 or 4. He won't make all the way to 6, but I
Right.
think it gets interesting in the conversation at 2. Not so in the fact that I think May and Daniels are that close prospect wise. I have May as QB2, Daniels as QB3, but I could see a scenario where they feel like Jaden Daniels' running ability will really enhance that offense and an offensive scheme. I think Drake May is also a really good athlete. He does a lot of good things inside the pocket and making throws on the move and down the field. But I think with Daniels' ascension this year, I think it at least is worth the conversation of could Daniels go at 2 to the Commanders? Could they really fall in love with him throughout the process and feel like he's a fit for what they do? So it's more so in playing these scenarios and so the fact that maybe this doesn't actually happen, but it's at least conversations being had in those rooms. And I think with Caleb Williams expected to go number 1 overall, I think number 2 could really get interesting if Daniels maybe he goes out and performs better at the combine than May. Then we have a whole completely different conversation. But I just thought that was an interesting move to make, and I feel like Daniels would make a lot of sense in Cliff Kingsbury's offense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Like, I think with the hiring process, it kind of changes things, right? We're all kind of slotting people. Hey, well, I personally feel Drake May is the second best quarterback. Well, you aren't really considering the fact that who they hired, and you're not putting yourself in their minds and trying to figure out who they might like. And that's the interesting thing about these mock drafts, Devin. So I think that was a really interesting pick. And like you said, probably if May fell past that point, and even if the Patriots passed him up, teams would then be looking to trade up. And your mock draft didn't include trade ups for quarterback. So that's something to note there. Maybe the Giants do end up with Drake May, like you had in your mock draft, but they probably have to move up a few picks to do that, right? The next part I want to highlight is the Broncos. Obviously, this is the Let's Talk Broncos podcast, Devin. So the pressure's on right now, man. You took Latu from UCLA, the edge rusher. I was really impressed with him. Just if I were probably thinking who is the most ready to come into the NFL and compete right now, it would be Latu. Can you kind of run us through why that would make sense for the Broncos?
Yeah, when I look at Latu's game, I think about a guy that's ready to come into the NFL and make an instantaneous impact in his ability to come with multiple different pass rush plans. When you look at the other edge rushers, Jared Verse is more of a speed to power player. And while he can win around the edge, he wants to win with power and go through your chest. Dallas Turner's more of the finesse player, more of a speed guy right now, and kind of has one pitch at the current moment. Latu really does it all. He can win around the corner. He can win on the inside move. He can win if he initially gets stymied. He can extend his hands, use it to do a swim move. I mean, there's so many different ways he can attack. And when I was looking, just through the mock draft, and once again, is kind of different scenarios. I had in my first mock draft, JJ McCarthy going to the Broncos, but this time around, since McCarthy went the pick before, I wanted to look at, all right, do they pivot and go for the ready-made edge rusher that could play today, and play and start on that roster tomorrow. And I looked at the roster, obviously, and there's some really good players on the Broncos roster, especially outside linebacker. Obviously, Jonathan Cooper, Baron Browning. But when you add a guy like Latu, who is a for sure ready to go pass rusher that can get you, 8, 7, 8, maybe 9 sacks as a rookie, I think adding him to an already impressive defense, I think that it just continues to elevate. So that's why I looked at in terms of adding Latu and why he made sense for the Broncos.
Absolutely. I think the Broncos have a lot, Devin. I think they have a lot of edge rushers that are kind of your Robin, and they're looking for their Batman right now. That's kind of what I feel like. Like when you look at just the roster, just in general, you're talking about they have so many guys that are almost inside linebacker, outside linebacker, pass rusher hybrids, designated pass rusher types. That whether that be Baron Browning, Drew Sanders even got edge reps this last year. You go down the list. Nick Benito, another one of those type of guys. They're looking for the 1A. And do you think Latu could be that 1A? Do you think he is also solid run defender?
I would say he's a solid run defender. I definitely think could get better. And I don't think he's ever going to be like this elite run defender in his career. He has a bit of short arms. He's not your freak of nature type of player.
Right.
He's not going to be for everyone either. But I think what he's shown in the run or his run stopping ability is a discipline to maintain his gaps, his ability to shed blocks, see the ball, get to where he needs to be, and make plays. Now he made plays both in obviously we talk about his pass rush ability, but he made a lot of plays as a run defender this year at UCLA too, which I think is one of his biggest points of growth this season as well. His pass rush ability was always known and lauded, but I think as a run defender, he improved this year and did a little bit better staying disciplined on those outside runs as well and not losing contain.
All right. Well, you love to hear it. You love to hear it. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Like there was that one rep at the Senior Bowl where he tried to hit the inside spin. I think it was against Guyton, and immediately hits him with the outside swim right off of that. It's like, okay, so how many players in this draft class even have that in their bag? None. Like it really feels like not a lot have that capability at this point, or like technique at this point and development at this point to have as many counters as Latu. And I do agree with you as well in that it feels like he did become a better run defender this season, especially considering like the seasons prior. So that's good. You want to see improvement as well in your draft prospects. But last part of your mock draft here I want to hit on is Brock Bowers, Broncos fans clamoring for him, Devin. They're clamoring for this guy. He goes down to 18 to Cincinnati, which would be just an insane pairing of talent, the guys that they already have down there. Is this just a case of NFL evaluators not thinking much of the tight end position? Is that why he goes to 18 in this mock draft?
Yeah, and I think it's so hard to say where exactly he'll go, right? And you feel like, okay, maybe goes to the Chargers at 5. All right, but if he doesn't go there, what kind of happens next? Where does he go next? I mentioned in the blurb that the Colts could be an option at 15, but they have a ton of tight ends on their roster already
Right.
too. And while he will be an upgrade in the passing game, especially, and obviously Shane Steichen is a creative play caller, I also think about what Cincinnati does and what they need from a tight end as well. Obviously, they could lose T. Higgins this offseason in free agency, but they really haven't had that dynamic playmaker with Joe Burrow, at least at tight end. I feel like he'll be that difference maker. But yeah, I think it's such an interesting conversation because you feel like he's a top 10, 15 player of really anyone in a draft class, but where do you slot him?
Yeah.
How valuable is he? He's not a Kyle Pitts type of athlete where he's going to test off the charts, have insane measurables. But he's certainly a guy that's worth going in the first round. He's on par with like a Dalton Kincaid that went in the first round last year. So I think it just becomes a game of, all right, where does he go? What team feels comfortable taking him? And I feel like kind of in that early second half of the first round, I think just makes sense in that range of like 15 to 19, maybe even 20. It just makes sense that he will fall in that range. But I think he's a guy that if you want to take him, at 12 with the Broncos, and you feel like he can be a difference maker, you take him there because he certainly was a guy that I thought about as well. But it just felt a little too early, just currently with the information we have about him. And obviously, he still needs to test and go through the interview process. But I think that's where I'm at with him right now.
No, I mean, I think this is one of the more interesting players to slot, if not the most interesting player of the slot. If you're doing a mock draft type of scenario, I think he could easily fall. I think a lot of it just has to do with the position he plays. Like you said, also the testing numbers. Like Brock Bowers is an incredible yards after catch type of tight end, right? You can't measure yards after catch in a combine. You just can't do that. Like there's no drill where somebody's trying to tackle him, right? There's none of that. So I think that's the type of stuff you're looking at there. And honestly, it's like, could he go as early as 5 to the Chargers? Absolutely. Could he go as late as 18 to the Bengals? Absolutely. I think he could go anywhere in that range, and none of it would shock me. None of it would shock me, especially when you start looking at first round tight ends in the past. There's just not a lot that have panned out. There hasn't been. And I know for how much we say, forget the past. It comes up. It definitely comes up in people's minds. So yeah, that's an interesting one right there. And then just transitioning, Devin, to kind of the main topic of this podcast. I wanted to talk to you about the edge guys and the interior defensive line guys. In your mock draft, you had 7 kind of defensive linemen in your mock draft, which is cool. I think that's a good amount. I didn't disagree with the single player you had mocked up there. But I saw Jared Verse went 1. And I'm curious, is that more of a situation based off your mock draft where you're like, I think Jared Verse goes 1, or who is your actual edge 1? Who would you rank as the best one in this class?
Yeah, for me it's Latu, but I think about Verse as being the most complete guy of the edge rushers currently. I think he gives you the best combination of run defender and pass rush upside
Mhm.
that I feel like makes sense for teams to decide to take him. Dallas Turner, I think, probably has the most intriguing skill set and probably has the best athletic profile of those top 3 guys, but there's still some things with him that need to be ironed out. And I feel like he's mostly an outside backer at the NFL level, which might take him off some teams' boards. So I think Verse is a guy that no matter what scheme that you're playing, I think he can fit in it. Whether it's a stand up 3-4 rusher, 4-3 hand in the ground, I think he can do both. And I think that ability to do both is the reason why I have him going first. But I think I don't fault anyone having like Turner number one. I don't follow anyone having Latu number one or even Verse, but I feel like those three guys have kind of started to create some separation from themselves or for themselves. But really, it's going to come down for Latu, his medicals, how they pan out. And I
Absolutely.
think for Verse, if he is the first edge off the board, he's going to have to test really well at the combine and show that he's just not just a mainly power guy, but has some speed and can utilize his ability to turn the corner as well. I think you don't see it a ton, not just because he can't do it, but because he really thrives off of that speed to power conversion.
No, I mean, yeah, listen, yeah, you say it so much better than me, Devin, with all your the scouting terms. You're amazing. You say it so much better than to me. To me, it's just like when Devin or when Jared puts hands on people, they move. Like that, that's honestly a lot of what I think. Like when I'm sitting there watching him, it's like, wow, there's a lot of power in that guy. Comparative, I think, to Latu and Dallas Turner, right? Um, I don't. I think, who do you think out of these three, if you were to like say who's the best run defending edge out of the three? If you had to pick one, would it be Verse?
Yeah, I would say Verse, but I think Turner is a close second. And I think because his explosiveness is just pops off the page. And even in plays where and I think when you look at like the production, obviously Verse and Latu may have the slight advantage on Turner, but Turner makes kind of the more eye-popping plays, if that makes sense, as a run defender,
Yeah,
versus just fundamentally sound, and he's going to be there and make the play. Like it may not be a tackle for loss, but he'll get them at the line of scrimmage. Just be making the plays he's supposed to make. Turner, for me, I feel like he's a guy that is going to, slip through the offensive line and make a 5 yard loss. Be a guy that's going to be on the QB contain. If a quarterback is running a zone read concept, he can make a play in space. So he's that type of run defender where I feel more comfortable with Turner making plays in space. But I
right.
think overall, Verse is a guy that from down to down, you're going to get more consistency. And I think that kind of is going to be his hallmark, translating to NFL level. He may not make all the flash plays, but you're going to look at the end of the season and be like, oh, Verse has 9 sacks this year, even though it didn't feel like he did, because he wins with so much power and he wants to overwhelm offensive linemen.
Absolutely. I think you nailed all three of those. Like I totally agree. So I'm just moving on later into this. Now, this is a guy that I think kind of just goes into the defensive line sphere. I don't know about just edge. Darius Robinson here from Mizzou. Obviously, a massive human being, Darius Robinson is. And when I watched him, I was like, wait, where is this guy mocked to go? And since then, Senior Bowl happened, and he's really moved up people's draft boards. It feels like the consensus in media has been a lot higher on Darius Robinson. Can you just give me your thoughts on him? And I'm also curious, what role does he play in your defense? Where would he most succeed?
Yeah, I'll start with the first question. Really during the season, he was a guy that I knew Mizzou was good, and then you watch their defense, you're like, oh wow, they have like 4 or 5 guys that are going to be on NFL rosters next year. Because I came in wanting to watch Chris Abrams-Drain, who's a really good defensive back, had a good week at the Senior Bowl. Enos Rakestraw, also another good defensive back as well in this class. But Robinson kept popping in terms of like his hand usage, his length. Really was the length that stood out early on with him. His ability to get into the chest of offensive linemen, bench press them, use that deadly swim move that he used like
Yep.
10,000 times at the Senior Bowl week. He did that on his tape too. But he's a guy that he did it from the three technique. He did it as a true five technique, as a hand in the ground defensive end. And I think, in kind of answering your second question here, I really think it depends on the defense. He's 286 pounds, 6'5", and he's a bit small, I would say, maybe a touch small to be just a three technique. So I see him more as a 4-3 traditional defensive end, a guy that is going to be able to get after you as a pass rusher, but he's not really a twitchy guy, if that makes sense. He's not like a Latu or a Dallas Turner, and where he's going to create pressure, in like 1.5, 2 seconds. He's more of a kind of he kind of gets stronger as the game goes along. He's not a guy that's going to, get like two first quarter sacks, but in the fourth quarter, because of his relentless motor and his ability to really get into the chest of offensive linemen, he's gonna be a guy that I would put money on as a top 3 or 4 ranked in terms of pressures created as a rookie, because I feel like he's a guy that creates a lot of pressure. Just his ability to get in the chest of offensive linemen and disrupt things. But yeah, his ascension has been good to see. I had him as a top 50 player initially going into Senior Bowl week, and I think it just made sense that coming out of it, he's even ranked even higher, and he showed his ability to be a pass rusher as a 3 technique and as a 5 technique, and I think that's so NFL teams on what he brings.
Yeah, and I think you mocked him to the perfect team because why the hell not? They take everyone I like. And that and that's the Baltimore Ravens. It doesn't matter what year it is, whether it be Travis Jones, whoever. The Ravens are going to take who who Joey Richards likes in the draft instead of the Broncos. It's a travesty, man. Uh, but yeah, no. Darius Robinson, I think you nailed that, and you said it like I said earlier, so much better than me. He just, to me, like you said, a guy that probably gets a lot more pressures if you were to sort it through that as a rookie. He's just a guy that screws the play up. He might not have all of the stats at the end of the year, although he did. I think it was 8.5 sacks this last year, which was pretty impressive. And from early on when I was watching him, started to move further and further out, which I think is so interesting. I don't see that much from these type of guys, especially from his build. He just looks very unique out there comparative to everybody else. Unique body size. Like you said, 6'5". What did you say? 286. Yeah,
Yeah, he went in Senior Bowl at the 286. And just to add something real quick, it's just so interesting with him specifically because you think of a guy his size, he would be a slower off the line, or at least like
mhm.
he moves like a guy that's like 265, which I just found super impressive. Like he doesn't move the way he's listed at, which makes you question like, should you even be playing at 286? Because if you cut 10, 15 pounds, would you be even more explosive? But we'll see what happens in terms of what he weighs in at the combine.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you nailed Darius Robinson too. The last question here, I haven't dug in as deep probably as you have into the edge class. I want to know a name, a guy that maybe goes later in the draft, maybe not a day one guy, that you think has a really good shot of being a good NFL football player at the edge position. Who would be your pick there?
Yeah, so I was watching the Senior Bowl. I want to say it was day one of practice, and with the national team, and you see these guys go through all these different pass rush drills, and like bending the corner and showing their ankle flexion and hip fluidity and ability to really transfer their weight. Adisa Isaac from Penn State is a guy that just really popped off for me because I'm looking through my binoculars. I'm just checking the other side of the field because I'm like on the left side of the stadium. And I'm just like looking around, just trying to take in like some of the pre-practice work. But man, Isaac just moves differently at his size. I think he came out like 6'4", 250 at the Senior Bowl. But he had his best season yet at Penn State. Obviously, he's playing opposite of Chop Robinson, and a lot of the attention is on Robinson, and rightfully so. His first step is probably one of the quickest, in all the draft class. And maybe we could talk about him in a little bit because he didn't make my round one mock, but I think he's a guy that's kind of all over the map for people. But back to Isaac, just his ability to turn the corner is so deadly. He had kind of a bit of a struggle early in the week going up against like Talisi Fuaga of Oregon State and some other really talented tackles, but he started to really put it together during the team period. His ability to speed to power conversions, just naturally win the corner, and he's just such a fluid athlete. And he
Mhm.
really showed me a lot of exciting things at the during the Senior Bowl week that I think will translate. I think he's a guy that probably goes like late second, early third round, but I could see him, in a year or two, really becoming a key part of a rotation and a guy that you know maybe 5 years down the line, he's a volume sack guy because he has the tools to do it. And we know Penn State always generates some eye popping athletes every single year. But yeah, Isaac is a guy for me that intrigued me. And then Marshawn Nealon from Western Michigan was another interesting guy. I won't go too much into him, but because I'm still doing some film study on him. But he was a guy that made some interesting plays throughout the week at the Senior Bowl, and is someone that made me want to dig more into his tape. But for a class that is kind of top heavy. There's like 6, 7, 8 guys that are really good, and then kind of drops off a little bit. I think Isaac is kind of in the middle there, and a guy that can get on day 2 of the draft and feel pretty good about moving forward in the future.
Yeah, no, and I watched Isaac, and he's a physical football player, man. He just is a really physical football player. I think he's a pretty good run defender too on that side, with room to grow as a pass rusher, is the way I would describe him after watching him. And yeah, I totally agree. I think he has a role in the league right away if he works his way on the right team, like the Broncos, for example. I don't know who on the Broncos right now, other than Cooper, is a better run defender than Isaac. And it's not just because Isaac is so phenomenal as a run defender, but really the Broncos have a ton of designated pass rushing type guys. So he fits a role in some rooms. And yeah, I don't mind that pick at all. I think that's a good call. And I want to move into the interior defensive lineman here, Devin. I saw you had Murphy above Jerzon Newton from Texas, and I'm just curious what your thought process is there. What distinguishes the two? What's the differences?
To me, I'm getting the sense that the NFL loves Murphy a lot, just
Yeah.
from kind of the talks intensifying of him after the season ended. Because for me, he was a guy like I watched like, all right, he was next to Newton, and he would make some plays here and there, but when you don't really study a guy fully in depth, you're just kind of like, okay, like he made a couple plays here and there. Maybe I'll go back to the tape a little bit later. But what really turned for me, because like he felt like a guy, all right, he's probably going to be a day 2 guy. He has some athleticism. He really popped. But I think what turned for me was a game against Washington in the college football playoff, and his ability to consistently win against interior offensive linemen was really impressive.
Mhm.
You dug more into the tape. He was handling double teams really well, even though he's a bit on the smaller side of your typical defensive lineman. And just the physical traits, he just looked the part. Looked like the defensive lineman that you want. For me, it's still Jarzon Newton as interior defensive lineman 1, because I think his highs outweigh really any other interior defensive lineman in terms of what he can do, where he's rushing from. He rushes across the entire defensive line, which makes Newton, to me, extremely valuable. Even if you don't see him as a true, one technique type of defensive tackle, I think he's still a really high level three technique. Maybe you throw him out at the 5 in certain packages. But I think for Murphy, he is built a little bit more stoutly. He's a guy that handles double teams a little bit better as a run defender than Newton. And he just feels like a guy that is going to test extremely well of interior defensive linemen. Not that Newton won't, but it just feels like Murphy's kind of like that built in the lab defensive lineman that everyone kind of falls in love with. And I think that's what you've seen. So for me, it's kind of more that pick is more of reacting to where I feel like the NFL is higher on him than Newton, because it feels like Newton is just kind of he's an undersized guy, and he's a good run defender, but there are times where he gets moved off the football. He doesn't always handle double teams as well. So I think that's kind of where you're splitting hairs in their evaluation, and where teams I feel like might like Murphy a little bit more.
Yes, I feel like it took off since that Washington game, and it might just have to do with a little bit of the every fan in the world was watching that game, because Byron Murphy had himself a game against Washington. Uh, I mean, even that play where Penix slid a little to I think it was to the left, avoided him, and threw a dagger right across the middle was a hell of a throw. But everyone was like, who is this Texas defensive tackle that just made that play? And Byron Murphy is extremely disruptive down there. Obviously, playing next to Sweat, that Texas interior defensive line was a problem. Adding on to your points about Jerzon Newton, hey, Devin, guess what? The Broncos just hired a defensive analyst as their DB coach who was with Illinois, and Jim Leonard is now their DB coach for them. So maybe they get a little scoop on Jerzon Newton there. I totally agree with you. I think he's extremely disruptive, and his highs are better than any of the other highs of this interior defensive line, especially past Murphy. Like, I think there's quite a bit of a drop off there. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I think those two guys are different. Like Devondre Sweat is not going to fit what everyone wants in a defensive tackle. Like if you want a true nose tackle that's going to clog up things and has upside the pass rusher, absolutely. But he's not a guy that I see going in the first round. And ultimately, I think he's like a late second, early third round. It just really depends on if a team finds a fit. But his weight is going to be an interesting topic of discussion because he chose
Yeah.
not to be in at the Senior Bowl. So I think what he weighs in at the combine is going to be a telltale sign, I think, of his draft stuff. But no, I agree with your point. I think after those two, it's a significant drop off of the class as a whole.
So, Devin, you're a better draft guy than me. You've been around the quarter, you've seen it. I don't understand, and maybe you could clarify this for me. Why would a Tavondre Sweat that is listed on Texas's website as 362 pounds not weigh in? Like, what is 10 pounds to me? At that point, like I just don't. That's something I don't know. That's I guess why you would bring that up. That's so curious. The guy is listed at 362 pounds. Why would he not weigh in? I'm already expecting him to be a really big guy.
Well, it could be because maybe he's 380. I mean,
Oh yeah,
that it could, like, I don't want to speculate, about what he weighs or anything like that, but there's always strange things happening throughout a draft process. Um I mean, you can go back to DeJuan Jones last year, he didn't want to weigh it either, so it's like guys that are that big, I think they feel like it hurts them more than helps them to have their weight out there. And there's a possibility that he already weighed more than what he was listed at Texas. They just didn't want to disclose that. So to me, it doesn't personally matter. I think, it you see it on tape. I mean, he's a massive guy. It's not like his motor is in question or anything like that because he plays hard every time you see him. So I don't really have a question about that. But I think maybe there's a threshold that teams have for guys like that, and he's worried that he may get taken off of boards because of that. That
that's
would
a
be
good point.
my guess.
That's a great point. And honestly, I think he moves really well for his size. Like, very impressive. If he really is out there weighing 360 pounds and he's moving the way he is, it's impressive. I think his hands on tape were the thing that impressed me most. The way his pass rush, like stuff like that, like stuff I don't just usually see from 360 pounds at nose tackle. Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of flip it to the other side. I'm gonna go with a lighter defensive lineman here, and that's Michael Hall Jr. That's a guy. Tell me if I'm crazy. I think he's pretty good. I think he's really good. And honestly, what he's just a tweener, and I know that kind of gets everyone out of sorts. Tell me if I'm crazy. Is he like what? Would you draft him in the first 3 rounds, Devin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a top 100 player
Love
for
it.
sure because what he does as a pass rusher just can't be really replicated in this interior defensive line class after the first round. I think then you're kind of looking for guys to fit certain roles, and he's going to fit a certain role. I think he's in a decent run defender, but he's not going to blow you away. In terms of making eye popping plays, really his hallmark is a pass rushing interior defensive lineman. If you're looking for those types of players that you can rotate in on third downs, that you can have certain packages for blitz, use different blitzes and twists and stunts. I think he's the type of guy that you want. So I think you're not crazy in your assessment of him being a top 3 round player. You look at this class. I mean, there's just not many guys that are going to be able to do what he does on a consistent level. And I think the consistency part is what really helps him, and it's gonna make him attractive, throughout the draft process. But yeah, he's a bit of a tweener. Once again, he's gonna be a guy that maybe is not on everyone's draft board, but I can absolutely see someone taking him in round 3, and having a guy that is a contributor, and continues to grow in his role as he adds weight to his frame.
Yeah, it's funny. Like they had another guy the Broncos drafted, and that's Draymond Jones, and it was a kind of a similar evaluation coming out of college. I think Draymond had a little more length than Michael Hall Jr. does here, but a guy that came in is, can he run defend? We don't know. We know he's a really good pass rusher though, and I thought Michael Hall, when he wasn't like doubled, he held his own. The other part of his game that's like needs to improve. His hat is always on the wrong side of the ball. It's like, okay, let's get that figured out, some stuff like that, but room to improve, which is fantastic, knowing where he already is as a pass rusher. But Devin, man, this was a great show. I'm happy you came on. Like I said, if people don't know by now, you are a fantastic draft evaluator, and yeah, so thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah,
Always down to talk ball and go through this process. Trying to as we're doing this, trying to myself, stay on top of some of the names. Obviously, the NFL Combine list came out earlier today, so now you're going through names and making sure that you're covering your bases and trying to learn as much about these guys as possible. But it's impossible. It feels like every time that you have a good handle on the class, like 10, 15, 20 new guys appear. But yeah, I love talking ball, man. Thanks for having me on, and we can definitely do this again.
for sure. I would love to. And then again, everybody, please go follow Devin. That's at real D_Jackson on Twitter. He's fantastic. He does a bunch of draft stuff. Make sure you're following him. And until next time, guys, go Broncos.